Hello. Are you recording? We are recording. Oh my gosh, that seems so unprofessional. I have tried my best to show you all different. Um, Start from the beginning. Oh well, apparently it's not going to do that for me. Will it? Okay, good. I've tried my best to show you all different perspectives of the industrial era. Right. I've tried to show you like the middle class, for example. Like we did a forum where it talked about the new amusement parks that people could go to in the late 1800s, the new foods they could buy. Coca-Cola and Pepsi comes out then, right? Just the what they can do with the extra money that they have because they're getting more money during this industrial era. I've talked about Native American history, African American history, trying to show you disadvantaged groups and how they've been mistreated. The labor unions that were full of immigrants, right, and their experiences coming to the United States. And we've even looked at the very rich and their experience. You've read things by Andrew Carnegie, right, and you've seen their. And I want to make sure that you're hearing the voices of the people, multiple different perspectives and voices, not just one. And here's the last voice that I think that we really need to look at for the industrial era, and that's the farmers. We haven't really talked about their voice yet. If you look on the screen, it says, "This is my argument today. This is my thesis statement. This is my argument. This is what I'm going to try to prove to you." The farmers and the populists were totally ineffective in bringing economic government reform in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. Now, here's the different thing I'm going to do today that I haven't done with you yet. Obviously, you're going to get notes, you're going to get facts, but I'm going to spin the facts in certain ways. On the front sheet of paper right there, I'm going to ask you to disprove my thesis. I'm going to ask you to disprove me. I'm going to ask you to argue against me after I'm done. Listen to the whole thing first, but then after that, see this part that says totally ineffective? I want you to argue that part and tell me, no, Mr. Beavers, I don't think you're right. So the facts that I'm going to give you are good facts. But when I spin the facts and say, this proves that they're not very effective, then that's where I want you to be aware and tell me I'm wrong later at the end. Okay, so let's go ahead and go. Setting the stage, I want you to think of as far as where and when. We're talking 1870s. We're talking after the Civil War. We're looking at the U.S. Great Plains. We're looking at Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, basically the places where the Native Americans had lived, and they're being pushed off the land from here, right? And who's moving into their place are white farmers, right? And I want to talk about those white farmers. What was it like for them? Well, you can see up here, they were using new machinery, the new industrial machinery, to basically turn this clay soil, this rough clay grassland, into a bread basket. They're using the steel plow to cut through the tough clay. They're using the reaper and the thresher. They're using the products of industrialization to turn the Great Plains into a bread basket to the point where we can actually just not only feed ourselves, we can feed a lot of the rest of the world. And even though that seems like an awesome thing, to the farmers, it seemed like every year it was getting worse and worse and worse for them. So again, the Great Plains, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, eastern Colorado, maybe southern South Dakota. Okay. Do you see my... Sorry, those of you who are doing the screencast. I'm having some difficulty getting my... Oh, there you go. Okay. All right, so that's what we're talking about, this central part of the U.S., farmers moving there. Now, here are the problems that the farmers are facing. The prices of their crops are failing. So if you turn to the next page, make sure you get all these filled out, and then I'm going to have you turn these into me. The prices of crops are falling. So they're not getting as much money as they as they want for their crops. They mortgage their farms in order to pay for their bills. If you don't know what mortgage means they're basically going to the bank and say, hey, give us some money. And the bank says, okay, but you have to let us have the deed to your farm. So you don't own your farm anymore. If you pay your bills, you can keep your farm. If you don't, you lose your farm. And so, of course, the farmers couldn't pay their bills. And so they had their farms foreclosed. The banks were taking away their farms left and right. And that wasn't all. There were big businesses like the railroads who were charging high prices, just a little light, charging high prices to ship their crops, ship the farmers' crops. And sometimes these railroads would change the price at the drop of a hat. So you would bring your goods to market, to the railroad. You expect to pay one price, and then after they load you up, they say, no, it changed in the last 10 minutes. You got to pay more, right? It seemed highly unfair. It seemed radically unfair. And it seemed to the farmers like the big businesses have all the power. The railroads and the grain elevators that they're taking their crops and their livestock to have too much power. And so the farmers of the Great Plains in the 1870s, 1880s feel like they've got it really bad. But this is America, right? In every other time period in world history, you would expect the people to be like, oh, well, can't do anything about it. But this is America, right? And we run the country. The people run the country, right? And so this woman named Mary Elizabeth Lease, she was a public speaker. She went to the farmers and she said, I don't usually use this language, so I apologize for swearing, but she said, farmers, we've got to stop raising crops and we need to start raising hell. We don't have to sit back and take this. We can fight. And I don't mean like, shooting guns. I mean, like we can struggle and we can resist and we don't have to take this. I mean, look at this. I mean, no wonder they couldn't pay their bills, right? Because that doesn't look like great farmland, right? Okay, so they took her advice and they formed alliances. These are basically farmers' unions, if you will. One is called the Grange and one was called the Farmers Alliance. And both of these things were basically organizations that got farmers together and they would send people to the state legislature of Kansas. They'd send people to the state legislature of Minnesota. They would send people to Washington, D.C., and they would ask for the government to pass laws that helped them in their struggle against the railroads. And eventually they form a political party called the Populist Party. And they try to get candidates elected for governors of states and in the state legislatures. They even get some people voted into office in Congress, and eventually they run presidential candidates that were called under the Populist Party. It was also called the People's Party. And essentially what they want is reform. Reform big business, have government pass laws that are in favor of us, and hopefully things will get better for us. Here's what they wanted: to regulate railroads and grain elevators. They wanted direct income taxes. They wanted direct election of U.S. senators. This next one, will you please change it to say inflation instead of deflation, because I made a mistake. That was my fault. Inflation, not deflation. And they also want something called bimetallism. And if you don't know what any of these things are, well, that's okay. I'm going to tell you. But remember, these are the 5 things they want. And I'm arguing that they were totally ineffective. And I'm asking you, when I'm done with this tomorrow, to prove me wrong. Okay? All right. Let's go with the railroads regulation first. There were laws called Granger laws, and these laws were passed by state governments. Remember, the Grange, the farmers' union, helped get them passed. And They basically told the railroads and the grain elevators, you can't change prices at the drop of a dime. You can't overcharge farmers. You've got to treat them fairly. And the railroads sued. You can't do this to us. And the Supreme Court sided with the farmers. The Supreme Court said in Munn versus Illinois, you can do that. You can regulate grain elevators. So immediately you should be thinking, Mr. Beavers, I already know that you're wrong. I already know. Look, the farmers were effective. They did something good. Here's my argument against that. These things did not even last 10 years. The Granger laws were overturned, so make sure you get overturned in the next blank. Because the big businesses pressured the states to overturn the laws. And then case went to the Supreme Court, and Munn versus Illinois was overturned by the Supreme Court 10 years later by a case called Wabash versus Illinois. Sorry?
No, it's already written in.
Oh, it's already written in? Okay, sorry about that. If you're on the screencast, these things are already filled in. My bad. Okay. So I'm saying that they failed, right? And then they said, well, if the states can't help us, individual states can't, then what about the national government? What about Congress? What about the president? The president at this time was Grover Cleveland. And they got Congress and the president to sign and pass a law called the Interstate Commerce Act, 1887. By the way, the same year that he passed this law that seemed to be helping out average people, Grover Cleveland also signed the Dawes Act, which hurt Native Americans big time. The Interstate Commerce Act created the Interstate Commerce Commission. And what the Interstate Commerce Commission was supposed to do, the federal government is going to regulate trade between states across state lines. And that's what railroads do. They go across state lines. So the government said we can control the railroads and make them do what we want them to do. And you might be saying, Mr. Beaver, see, you were wrong. The federal government stepped in and wanted to help the farmers out. Now, if you're screencasting, hold on. Here's the problem with this. See this last thing? There were 16 cases that went to the Supreme Court on this, where the Interstate Commerce Commission took these 16 different businesses, railroads, to court and said, you got to stop doing what you're doing. And 15 out of the 16 cases, the businesses won. The little people, the small people, the farmers, won 1 out of 16 cases. It seems like when it comes to regulating the railroads, the average person just doesn't have enough power to stop this. Okay, next one. Okay, if they can't regulate the railroads very effectively, then what about direct income taxes? That's their next thing that they want. And you might be asking, well, Mr. Beavers, why would they want to pay income taxes? That doesn't make any sense. If you don't have to pay income taxes before, why would you want to pay them now? Well, the farmers didn't want to pay them. They wanted to make the rich pay them. Because they think if the rich have to pay, money is power. Less money means less power. And so they're going to make the rich businessmen pay more money. And there was a law passed in 1894 that said, you know, if you make more than, I think, $4,000, you got to pay a certain income tax. So that means the poor farmers didn't have to pay it. Well, the rich businessmen took that to the Supreme Court, and you can see in the Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company Supreme Court ruling, the Supreme Court said income taxes are unconstitutional. You can't do it. So the farmers lost. And maybe some of you are saying, well, Mr. Beavers, I know for a fact. You've taught me this, Mr. Beavers. We have income taxes now. That's Amendment 16. And my argument is the farmers did not get it. It didn't happen until almost 20 years later. And it didn't happen because of the populists. It happened because of the progressives. So this is the second thing that they wanted, and the populists themselves did not get it. What about direct election of U.S. senators? You might remember that the state legislature chose the U.S. senators originally. The populists thought, well, the state legislatures are in the pocket of big business. And so the people that are being sent to the U.S. Senate are in favor of big business. We, the people, the average common people, are not getting anybody to represent us in the Senate. So what we need to do is get rid of the middleman, not have the state legislatures send senators, but us, the people, directly. And you might say, Mr. Beavers, you've taught me, I know this. Amendment 17 is direct election of U.S. senators. The populists won. And my argument is, no, they didn't. The populists didn't get it. It didn't happen until almost 20 years later, as you can see there, 1913, when the progressives got it. So the populists are losing, losing, losing. Now there's two more things, inflation and bimetallism, that they want, and I'm going to tell you that they didn't get it. So let's do that. Okay. I have to explain a little bit of economic theory here, and I know this is not the most fun thing to learn about, economics, so bear with me, please. I've got to explain inflation and deflation. Deflation was the problem. The populists want inflation to be caused. When deflation happens, we're talking about the amount of money in circulation, right? Okay, so what does that mean to have amount of money in circulation? You have dollar bills in your pocket. I have dollar bills in my pocket. You have dollar bills in your bank account. I have dollar bills in my bank account, right? Like we have these things, and we trade them back and forth with people and businesses, and the dollars just circulate around the country, right? If there's this much, and the federal government decides that they're going to destroy, let's say, $1 million worth of dollars, then that means the supply of money shrinks, right? There's less dollars out there that you can get your hands on. And this is what was happening in the 1890s. There was less money to get your hands on, and the farmers weren't getting what they wanted, right? They couldn't pay off their debts. See if this makes sense. Deflation is the amount of money in circulation decreases. Now, if you have less of something, that means that it's worth more. The more rare something is, the more valuable it is. Does this make sense? Okay, so think about this real quick. If I have a diamond in this hand and a rock in this hand, why is the diamond worth more than the rock? Say that again. Right? I mean, we could say, well, I don't have to work to find the rock. I can just go out in the field and find a rock, right? With a diamond, I have to go to a mine. I have to mine the diamond. I have to clean the diamond. I have to shape the diamond. And there is something to that, right? But just for the fact that the diamond, there's less of them. There's less diamonds than there are rocks. The diamond is more valuable. If deflation is happening, there's less dollar bills, then that means, there's less dollar bills, then that means that there's less in circulation. That means the value of the money goes up. If this happens too much, then that means people like you and me that have to pay off our debts, we can't get dollar bills in our hands because they're so rare. The populists wanted this to happen. Inflation. They wanted the amount of money in circulation to increase. They would want more dollar bills to be printed. And yes, the value of the money goes down. And that's not good. But the populists thought, if that happens, prices will go up. We'll get more money for our crops, and there's more money out there to get our hands on so we can pay off our debts. That's what they wanted to cause. Now, let me try to see if this makes sense here. Okay, let me do this. I'm going to have to do this in front of this screen over here, but let's see if this economic idea makes sense. If I take a balloon and I don't have too much asthma, okay, see that screencast, people? Say I have this much money. Say that air in here represents dollar bills, right? If I do this, see that, people? What did I just do to the balloon? I deflated it, right? There's less air. If we're using the air as money, there's less money. Now, what happens to the value of that money? It goes up. Prices will also go down. You can buy more with that, with those dollars. Okay, now, okay, what have I done to the balloon? It's inflated, right? Inflation is more dollar bills in circulation, more total. What happens to the value of money? It goes down, but what happens to the value, or what happens to prices? They go up. We don't want too much of either, right? Okay, I know it's a little weird, but I'm trying to keep your attention, right? So, okay, so let's see what happens here. If up arrow or down arrow with deflation, money in circulation, does it go up or down with deflation? Value of money, prices of goods. That was the problem. There was too much of that with the populace. This is what they want to cause. What arrow goes here? Okay, good. I think that you all got it. So let's go to the next thing here. The populist wanted bimetallism. One thing that I need to kind of, I don't know, explain here, just to add to this, is that it wasn't just dollar bills. It wasn't just green dollar bills that got passed around, back then. Also, your dollar bills represented gold. So if you had a $100 bill and you took it to the bank, they would give you $100 worth of gold, right? Your dollar was backed by something real and tangible in your hands. It's not like that anymore. But you used to be able to have gold to back your dollar. What the populace said is, if we have gold and we add silver to the money supply, we've caused inflation. That's what they want. Bimetallism. Bi means two, metal, two metals. Do you think that the populace got what they wanted? For a time, there was some silver backing dollars. But in 1900, the federal government passed a law that said the United States is primarily going to be on the gold standard, not using silver hardly at all, because silver is not worth that much. Gold is. The populace lost again. Everything they want doesn't happen, right? Okay, so then this panic happens in 1893, and this is the second worst financial panic in American history. The only thing that was worse was the Great Depression. And in this, railroads are going bankrupt because they're building too much track and they're not having enough business go across it. If the railroads go out of business, then the steel and the iron industries go out of business, and the banks that support them go out of business. And before too long, there's just a whole bunch of not good stuff going on, right? People started realizing my paper money may not be worth very much. So they started trading it in for gold, left and right. And so the federal government's gold reserves went down. It shrank, right? That was deflation. It was a problem. Unemployment reached 20%. The only time it ever got worse in American history for unemployment was the Great Depression. And it wasn't the rich who were hurting. JP Morgan went to the federal government and said, hey, guys, do you need gold? Oh, yeah, I've got some gold. I'll sell you gold. And in order to help bail out the federal government out of this panic, he sells them gold and he makes a ton of money off of it. He helps the country, but he gets a lot of cheddar cheese for his effort, right? It's the farmers and the average people who are suffering. And by this time, the farmers say to the factory workers, hey, we've got a lot in common. We're both out of work. We both don't like the big businesses. Let's join together. And that's what the Populist Party was, the joining together of those two groups. So here comes a guy named Jacob Coxey. He was from Ohio. Coxey's army was his group of followers who went to Washington, D.C. Okay, so he's from Ohio. He wants some populist type things. He wants the federal government to print money. He wants the federal government to print more greenback paper money, which would cause inflation, and then use that money, that extra money, to start building public projects like parks and dams and bridges and roads. He thought that's going to help our deflation problem, will cause inflation, and then that'll help lower unemployment too, because people will be working, building those public projects. So he believes in his ideas so much that he walks. He walks, because there's no cars, right? He walks from Massillon, Ohio to Washington, D.C. Now, I'm going to remind you again, because I love reminding people, I've got a sister in the Secret Service. Did you know I have a sister in the Secret Service? I have a sister in the Secret Service. Just drop that again, right? So you all know. When we go to see her in Washington, D.C., it takes us 7 hours. If we don't stop to drive there, and we have to stop because we have kids, right? So it's probably going to take us 8 or 9 hours to get there, right? To drive. Massillon, Ohio is 2 hours north of here. So if I'm driving today to Massillon, Ohio, it's going to take from Massillon, Ohio to Washington, D.C., it's going to at least take 12 hours, right, to drive. Imagine how long it would take to walk there. And he walks there. And it's not just him. He starts off with 100 people. And by the time they get to Washington, D.C., they've grown. Coxey's army has grown to 500 people. And they get to Washington, D.C. because they think that President Cleveland is an honorable man, and he will help them out because they're just poor average people suffering during this financial panic. Put yourself in the position of a president, right? This is before. Did any of you go to Washington, D.C. in 8th grade? All right. Did you see the White House? You see how guarded it is? There's those iron gates all around it, right? There's guard towers and checkpoints. There's snipers on the roof. There's literally ninjas in the bushes that you'll never see there because you're not supposed to see them there, right? And they'll come out of the bushes and they'll get you if you're trying to do something, some shenanigans. There's helicopters in the sky. There's all this kind of stuff, right? And that's not what it was like in 1894, right? It was the White House, no fences, and a lawn. Imagine if you're the president and you see this army of people, 500 people, come up to the White House, right? What are you thinking? Right? And so he had them arrested. He didn't listen to their pleas. They got arrested. And a lot of them got injured when they had resisted arrest. So again, is the federal government going to listen to the pleas of the farmers and the populace? And again, no. Right? Coxey's army failed. And there is Jacob Coxey, just so you can get a face with the name. So the last thing that the populists think that they can do in order to get what they want is to get a president elected. They've gotten some governors, they've gotten some congressmen, but they think if they get a president elected that cares about what they care about, then they will be somebody can get something done that they like. So in the election of 1896, we have William Jennings Bryan versus William McKinley, two Williams. William Jennings Bryan is the D Democrat, is what the D stands for. But he's also a populist reformer. He believes in everything that the populists want. He's going up against William McKinley, The Republican. The pro-business Republican who the rich and powerful think, we want this guy to win. The Republicans want gold only. The Republicans do not want bimetallism. Not even all the Democrats want bimetallism. Some of the Democrats want gold and silver. Some of the Democrats just want gold. They're called gold Democrats during this time. And when William Jennings Bryan, the populist, goes up in front of the Democrats and he accepts their nomination, he makes this speech, and it's supposed to be one of the greatest speeches in American political history, one of the greatest. And he looks at the gold Democrats in the audience. He basically calls them out and he says, you guys are trying to hurt the farmers on purpose. And he's a Christian. He's like a preacher kind of guy. He says, it's like you all are the Roman government who nailed Jesus to the cross. Jesus was innocent. He didn't deserve it. And that's what you're doing to the farmers. You are nailing the farmers to a cross of gold. You're killing them with this gold standard. Now, William Jennings Bryan went across the country, like touring on trains, right? He was for the common person. William McKinley sat on his front porch to do campaign. He let newspaper people come to him, and that's how he campaigned, right? William Jennings Bryan is one of the first people to go out and campaign for himself. Who should have won this election? It should have been the guy that was for the common people, because there's so many common people, right? He's speaking to the farmers. He's speaking to the factory workers. And the factory owners, the owners of the factories, tell the factory workers, hey, if you guys go vote for William Jennings Bryan, you're pretty much fired. If we find out you voted for him, you're out of work. Because if William Jennings Bryan wins, then our business will be out of business and you won't have a job. So you might as well not show up tomorrow. And union workers didn't go to vote in major key cities. And William Jennings Bryan, the champion of the populists, gets defeated pretty bad. Tomorrow I'm going to ask you to disprove my thesis that the populists were totally ineffective. Okay? It is. That's right. Let me end this screencast real quick.